Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Erie, our Sunday service for today, August 1st. If you are willing and able, please have a chalice or a candle and a bell nearby to ring in the service. Our service this morning is reading, reflecting, and responding to racism with sermonettes given by myself, Mary Desmone, Janice Etchison, Pamela Moore, and Linda Williams. We're going to hear some beautiful music today, some beautiful songs, some thoughtful words. I want to thank everybody who made this possible to bring this Sunday service to you this morning. So with that, we are going to do our bell ringing. And remember, with the bell ringing, you have to unmute yourself while you're ringing your bell, and then please mute yourself again when that's done. So I invite you this morning to unmute yourself, and with the sound of bells, we welcome stranger and friends to a time of mindfulness. Thank you all. And now we are going to have our welcoming song this morning. And that is going to be sung by our songstress, Annette Cruzwitz. It's the words are from the Jefferson Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Golden, Colorado, and the music is by Hal Walker. And this morning it's going to be sung by Annette. Annette?
Whoever you are, we welcome you. Wherever you come from, we welcome you. Whoever you love, we welcome you. Whoever you are, we welcome you. Wherever you come from, we welcome you. Whoever you love, we welcome you. Whoever you love, we welcome you. Whoever you love, we welcome you.
Thank you, Annette. So before we get to our opening words, I'm going to read a reflection written by Linda Williams, a member of the community and the book club that has been together for a year now. She says, how did this book club get started? 2 to 3 years ago, our Social Action and Responsibility Committee committed to a series of films and reading and discussing Michele Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of the Drug Wars. We invited a few other members of socially conscious faith groups to join us. Alexander's book documents the unfair and highly punitive nature of our current criminal justice system, the impact that its strictures have had on communities of color over the last 40 years. The impact of that book and the obscene number of largely Black males killed by police in America, mostly without penalty or punishment, made it important to continue to look at racism from historical, political, and personal perspectives. Which brings us to the opening words, also written by Linda Williams. Who better to learn from than those largely Black authors who are trying to find ways to change systemic racism in our country? So if you have a chalice or a candle nearby, oh no, I'm sorry. we're going to get to the Prelude. And our Prelude this morning is by Clyde Mitchell, and you will be hearing more about and more from Clyde later in the service.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fear received. How precious did that grace appeared the hour I first believed. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, we have already come. 'Twas that brought we safe thus far, and grace will lead us home. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright sunny night, the sun, we've no less day to sing our praise than we first begun.
Our chalice lighting this morning, if you do have a chalice or a candle nearby, now's the time to light it. It comes from a book, Voices from the Margins, and it is by Jennifer Kwan. We take refuge in all that is holy. We take refuge in sacred teachings throughout the ages. We take refuge in our community of faith and the interdependent web of life. And now for our covenants, and that will be with Mary Desmone.
We are Unitarian Universalists, a people of open minds, loving hearts, and welcoming hands. We care for the earth and each other. Our bond of union. We unite ourselves together for the study and practice of morality and religion, as interpreted by the growing thought and noblest lives of humanity, believing that we may thereby prove helpful one to another and promote the cause of truth, righteousness, and love in the world.
Thank you, Mary. Now it's time for our offering. If you would like to mail a donation to the church, you can see the address there. You can donate online, and you can see that information there too. If you do send a check to the church, please make it payable to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Erie, or UUCE. Put on the memo line what that check is for, whether it is for your pledge, your annual pledge, if it's a little extra monetary donation, if it's going towards the Erie Bail Fund or possibly the food pantry. Whatever it's for, please indicate that on the memo line. So the information is there. So we're going to go stop screen sharing. We do not have an offertory this morning. We are going to stop screen sharing, and I'm going to start today. We're going to hear from myself and the others that I mentioned earlier in during the welcome. Some of it is right here in real time. Some of it is recorded, but we're going to go ahead with that. So when the idea of this book club was mentioned to me, we were a couple months into a global pandemic. Racial tensions exploded, and people took to the streets all over this country. And we were in the midst of a sensationalized political arena that was becoming increasingly more dangerous to the very democracy that we live in. In that moment, I needed something to ground me and bring me to a place of understanding. And the book club seemed like just the thing to do that. When we started out as a group of 9, our intention was to dive into some books that could go deep into our psyche and spark conversations that we knew would not be easy. The conversations were difficult at times, uncomfortable, and heartfelt. And it felt good to be having real conversations about real issues that are woven into the fabric of our society, like we were making some sort of difference in the world. And we were. We started off with the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram Kendi. He says in the book, well, the book talks about the neutrality of saying you're not a racist. He says in the book, one either allows racial inequities to persevere as a racist or confronts racial inequities as an anti-racist. There is no in-between safe space of not racist. He goes on to say, the only way to undo racism is to consistently identify and describe it, and then dismantle it. As we moved through the other 8 books, I realized there was so much I really did not know. Some of the books not only touched on racism, but sexism and classism as well. The term intersectionality was coined by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw in her 1989 legal essay, in which she says, intersectionality describes the way that we benefit from or are harmed by systems of oppression, according to our overlapping identities. Intersectionality helps us to understand the full complexities of people's individual experiences. Everyone's experiences, even those that benefit from it, like those who stormed the Capitol on January 6th. We were just finishing the book White Rage by Carol Anderson, the book that takes a long look at white supremacy and the pushback that happens when there is a threat to the hierarchy. Going from that book to Proud Boys and the White Ethno-State by Alexandra Minna-Stern, which gives a chilling history of white nationalist groups here in America. Watching the insurrection in real time was almost like watching the pages of those books come alive. Ibram Kendi said on that day, white privilege is on display like never before in the US Capitol. Many of the book discussions we had led to talking about current events or recalling personal experience. And for me, it was a real time of growth. I also know there is so much more to learn and understand, and it's comforting to me to know that there are others out there hoping to make some kind of difference in the community we live in. Now we are going to have a video sermonette by Linda Williams. Before we start it, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Linda. When Linda moved to Erie 45 years ago to teach biology at Mercyhurst College, there was no Quaker group meeting in Erie. She did the next best thing and joined the Erie Unitarian Society. Several years later, she learned of a forming Quaker worship group and has been helping to convene that group for the last 35 years. During that time, Linda practiced physical therapy at Health South and Great Lakes Home Care and Hospice for 21 years. In retirement, Linda teaches Qigong at the Mercy Hilltop Center and directs the Great Lake Erie Threshold Choir. She loves that the Unitarian Universalists reached out to her email Quaker group. To her small Quaker group, sorry. Inviting some of them to join in discussing Michele Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, and joining the anti-mass incarceration group, and then including her in the anti-racist book group. So now we're going to hear some from Linda.
Good morning, everyone. One of the books that had impacted me very significantly was So You Want to Talk About Race. It's by Ijoma Aluo, the child of a Caucasian mother and a Nigerian father, who identifies as Black because skin color is the most obvious determinant of her identity in the world. Probably each of us can recall incidents that profoundly shaped us and continue to shape our behavior. And while most of us probably rebelled against some aspects of this conditioning, we're rarely fully free of it. But none of it can compare with the barrage of experiences that most Black people have had from living in our dominant white ethos. The messages say, you don't quite measure up. Why won't you conform to our standards of taste, beauty, and behavior, and so forth? And if you do manage to excel, white people will somehow lose something. It's because of these white cultural norms that we are de facto a white supremacist society. I was quite struck by the fact that the author says the most difficult conversation she's ever had about race and racism is one she had with her mother. At work one day, her mom had an encounter with a Black colleague who said to her, "What do you know about being Black?" Her mother's planned response that she shared with Ijoma in a cell phone conversation was, "He doesn't know that I have 3 Black kids, and he's probably gone through so much racism, he doesn't know who the good white people are." Ijoma's resounding response was, "No! Mother, haven't you read any of my work?" And she said this led to a very long conversation with her mother about the difference between being a white mother who has raised and lived with Black people and being a Black person who experiences the full impact of white supremacist society every day of her life. The major point that Aluo makes is that we must talk to one another and to try to understand one another if we're ever to heal the rifts and inequalities in our society. She defines intersectionality, cultural appropriation, model minorities, tone policing, and microaggressions, and makes specific suggestions about how to respond if one is told or realizes something inappropriate that one has said or done. When that happens, she suggests pausing and remembering the importance of improving a relationship and asking oneself, do I really know why I said that? And would I have said it to a person of my own race? Was I feeling threatened or uncomfortable in some way? And if so, why? She says it's also most important to acknowledge that someone's feelings were hurt. Don't force the Black person or Indigenous person of color to acknowledge your good intentions. It's not about us. Remember that racism and the trauma of racism is cumulative, and it's not just this one instance that's upset the person. Finally, just apologize and research further on your own how or why you offended the person. It's not the responsibility of a minority person to educate you. Inevitably, Luo says, you will make mistakes, use them as opportunities to learn and improve relationship. It's worth a discomfort if we truly hope to become good allies and alter the biases and racist policies that make American society today.
Next, we are going to hear from Janice Etchison. She is here with us this morning. A little bit about Janice first. She was born and raised in Erie. After graduating from high school, moved to Baltimore to attend college and teach high school in the Baltimore public school system, where she met her future husband. They moved to Brooklyn, New York, and stayed for almost 40 years before returning to Erie to reconnect with the Benedictine sisters, who were her high school teachers. Janice has worked at the Benedict Education Center, serving the immigrant community and helping them find gainful employment, and currently works at Bennett Vision, a group that promotes all things related to Sister Joan Chittister. She is a Benedictine Oblate, a member of Benedictines for Peace, and actively involved in the Erie Mass Incarceration Group. Her environmental activities include holding Erie Coke accountable and currently committed to lobbying city leaders to end their relationship with the International Recycling Group. Janice?
Thank you, Michele. Earlier this week, I listened to an interview with Eddie Glaude, a well-respected Black professor of African Studies at Princeton University, and author of the 2020 book, Begin Again, about James Baldwin and the history of American politics. At one point in the interview, he said, "We all have work to do." I gasped and said, yes. And why then that I decided to entitle my presentation, "We all have work to do." And also the reason I chose to reflect on the book, Me and White Supremacy by Layla Saad. This book was designed not just to read, but to work through a 28-day challenge of journal prompts. To read, reflect, and write. Included in the challenges are topics such as white fragility, white superiority, white apathy, white blindness. Some questions to reflect on that were included are, how have you stayed silent when it comes to race and racism? To what extent do you place white comfort over anti-racism in your family? In what ways will your privilege need to change in order for you to consistently practice anti-racism? During the month we focused on this book, I struggled with various emotions. Often I was angry, As I reflected on these questions, there were moments when I wanted to throw the book away. It was a very tough experience for me. Why? Because I assumed for years and years that I was not a racist. As stated in my introduction, I grew up in Erie, attended college in Baltimore, and remained in the city for 5 years to teach in a public high school where many of my students were Black. During that time, they invited me to be a co-faculty advisor for the Black Culture Club, and later I became faculty advisor to the senior class. I was accepted in their world, faced some of the issues they faced. I became buddies with the student leaders. Many of them were Black. When I moved to Brooklyn, New York with my new husband, we lived in integrated neighborhoods. Our neighbors were Black. Our daughter attended one of the best public elementary schools in Brooklyn, where she made several Black friends. After my divorce, I moved to an apartment living across the hall from Letitia James, who is now the Attorney General of New York State. One of my best friends was a Black woman who was divorced and raising a daughter who attended an Ivy League college, just as my daughter did. How could I be a racist? When I started reading and journaling with this book, I was forced to reflect on myself in new ways. How privileged I was to be white. My white privilege opened all these doors for me, starting with my first job as a high school teacher in Baltimore. Layla Saad kept asking questions that I had to face if I wanted to be honest about myself, not just with white privilege, but with white supremacy and white silence too. I end my presentation with one of her questions, one of the toughest. In what ways do you believe that you are exceptional, exempt, one of the good ones, or above the conditioning of white supremacy? As Eddie Glaude said, we all have work to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Janice. Next, we are going to hear from Pamela Moore, and that is through a video. But before we play that video, I will tell you a little bit about Pamela. She is a member of the Religious Society of Friends, an Erie worship group, the NAACP,
Good morning, everyone.
PA Prison Society, and UUE Anti-Mass Incarceration Group. She is a recently retired social worker and attorney. She volunteers as a visitor with the Pennsylvania Prison Society and with the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention, Presque Isle State Park, and Erie Peace Team. And now we're going to hear a reflection from Pamela.
Good morning. My name is Pamela, and I'm part of the Racism Book Group. And I really thank you all for inviting us to share with you today. We read a huge array of books, and they were all really worthwhile books, every one of them. I got something out of each one of them, even when I wasn't expecting it. But the one that stood out for me the most was Ibram Kendi's book called Stamped from the Beginning, a history or a definitive history of racist ideas in America. And this is the book. It is a little long. It's about 700 pages. He uses the term racist ideas instead of racism. And his premise is that racist ideas, which started back well before the America was formed, spawned racist policies in America and more racist ideas than ignorance and hate. From his definition, a racist idea is a concept that means that one group is inferior to another group in any way. In his book, we can see how this progression of racist ideas have really entrenched our culture in a variety of ways that we may not even be aware of. In our economics, our culture, our language, our politics, our laws, all have roots in racist ideas. He classifies ideas that pertain to race into three categories: segregationist ideas, and that those ideas blame Black people for the disparities between the races; assimilationist ideas, which blame discrimination but also caution Black people to behave more like white people or adopt white culture so that they are not blamed for the racist things that happen to them; and then anti-racist ideas, which blame discrimination for the disparities. Stamp discusses 5 prominent Americans that Ibram Kendi feels like most prominently portrayed racism in America, or ideas in America. Cotton Mather was way back before we even were a country. Thomas Jefferson, William Lloyd Garrison, W.E. Du Bois, and Angela Davis. But he doesn't just discuss those 5 people. He goes through the history of the entire United States, and before it was the United States, demonstrated these 3 forces of segregation, anti-racist, and assimilation, and how they clash and conflict and still are doing so today. And some of the history you'll find is well known, it's easy read, and some is, well, at least it was news to me. Despite the conflict of ideas, the book does end on a hopeful note. And I'm not going to tell you the ending, but I hope you will read it and get as much out of it as I did. Thank you very much.
And now
Good
we
morning.
are going to hear from Mary Desmone, who is with us this morning. Mary?
Good morning, everybody. The very first book we read, and Michele mentioned this, was How to Be an Anti-Racist by Ibram X. Kendi. That book had the most impact on me. The book was very well written, easy to understand, and the author shared his personal experiences throughout. The author began each chapter with definitions. In chapter 1 were these definitions: racist, one who is supporting a racist policy through their actions or inactions or expressing a racist idea. Anti-racist, one who is supporting an anti-racist policy through their actions or expressing an anti-racist idea. The first 3 chapters, definitions, dueling consciousness, and power, set the stage for the remainder of the book. Dueling consciousness was particularly illuminating to me. In this chapter, Kendi defined and described the differences between segregationists, assimilationists, and anti-racist. I have to admit, I held a couple of segregationist ideas in my early years, mostly assimilation ideas in my middle years, and more anti-racist ideas in my later years. The next 12 chapters identify different racist constructs, such as sexuality, culture, ethnicity, etc. Kendi described how racist policies play out in real life and how to change those policies to anti-racist policies. This was the missing piece of my understanding. The last 3 chapters, failure, success, and survival, brought reality to the urgency of these times. He ended his book with a hopeful message. What gives me hope is a simple truism. Once we lose hope, we are guaranteed to lose. But if we ignore the odds and fight to create an anti-racist world, Then we give humanity a chance to one day survive, a chance to live in communion, a chance to be forever free. After reading the book, I felt hopeful. I had the belief that if we could change systemic racist policies to anti-racist policies, it would change the lives of the citizens who have suffered the most under the weight of the racist policies. In my opinion, this is a must-read book for the work that needs to be done against racist policies. This is one of the books we gave Mayor Schember after our last book group meeting on June 11th, which he attended with Mr. Michael Outlaw. This book is probably the main reason I applied on behalf of our UUCE Community Anti-Mass Incarceration Group to participate in the Erie Racial Justice Policy Initiative. The initiative was started by Mayor Schember and his administration to identify and correct policies that perpetuate racist injustice and inequality in Erie. The work is not easy, but it is crucial for getting racial justice. If we can change one racist policy to an anti-racist policy, there is hope for the people in Erie who will benefit from our work. Through this initiative, we will have created the template for future anti-racist policies. This is my hope. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. And I want to thank all you ladies for your reflections this morning and your heartfelt thoughts. We're going to move into joys and concerns now. And that is going to be followed by a moment of silence, which will be followed by an acknowledgement of the joys and concerns. This moment, please use your chat box to share how you are feeling. It is a moment of reflection to bear witness to our words and hold space for each other. And these will be shared with our Reverend Christina Church, who is not with us this morning, but we will share these with her. So please take a moment during this musical break, followed by a musical meditation, moment of silence, and we'll be back to acknowledge those joys and concerns. Thank you. So this morning we had a lot of thank yous for sharing, joy for positive family health and time with family. There are people that are feeling reflective on their own thoughts about the racism and the intersectionality. Thanks for a wonderful, thoughtful service. There has been inquiries about the titles of the books and how to get involved. I'll be making an announcement at the end of the service. And also look to the weekend news on Thursday. I will put a list of the books in there. And the book club, we are continuing on. We have created a list of books of 8 other titles. One of them was recommended by Mayor Schember. Another one was recommended by Michael Outlaw. We did include those books in our new list of books. We're continuing on for the next year, and I will make a mindful attempt to keep everyone informed on where the book club is, what book we're reading, at what time, and I will do that in the weekend news that you get through the email. If you have any questions outside of what is included in that weekend news, just contact myself or Mary Desmone. So right now we are going to have the closing words with Mary.
The closing words are by Ibram X. Kendi. These were the ones that Pamela referred to. There will come a time when Americans will realize that the only thing wrong with Black people is they think something is wrong with Black people. There will come a time when racist ideas will no longer obstruct us from seeing the complete and utter abnormality of racial disparities. There will come a time when we will love humanity, when we will gain the courage to fight for an equitable society for our beloved humanity, knowing intelligently that when we fight for humanity, we are fighting for ourselves. There will come a time, maybe, just maybe, that time is now. And now for extinguishing the chalice. If you did light a chalice, you can extinguish it at any time while I'm reading this. This is by Joseph M. Cherry. If we have any hope of transforming the world and changing ourselves, we must be bold enough to step into our discomfort, brave enough to be clumsy there, loving enough to forgive ourselves and others. May we, as people of faith, be granted the strength to be so bold, so brave, and so loving. During the postlude, remember that you can use that time to put an announcement in the chat box. I wanted to share a little bit about Clyde Mitchell, who was the person who is singing the songs this morning. I met Clyde in Bradenton, Florida. I think it was in 2019 when we first started to talk about doing the service, Steve and I, about our trip to Montgomery, Alabama. I was looking for someone to sing the songs, a person of color, a Black person. And I have a friend in Bradenton who gave me Clyde's name, who said, this person can really sing. So I contacted him and I told him what we were trying to do and asked if he would be willing to sing. And he graciously said yes. So he hooked up with a friend and they created this audio tape for me. And it's the first one he ever did, he told me. And he was so happy that we asked him, and that he felt that he had been given an opportunity to do something that he's always wanted to do, and that was to be taped singing. And so I used this audio when I did the service in Bradenton, and I asked him, do you mind if I use it when I go back to Erie? He said, it's yours. You paid for it. It's yours. You can do with it whatever you want. So now I get to listen to it whenever I am in that mood. So here he is singing We Shall Overcome.
We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. All deep in my heart. We shall overcome someday. We shall all be free. We shall all be free. We shall all be free someday. All deep in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace. We shall live in peace someday. Oh, in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, in my heart, I do believe we shall overcome someday.